Welcome back to the Magic the Gathering Unofficial Audiobooks podcast. I know you're probably binging these things as they first come out because I'm releasing them all together. So just a quick shout out to our first sponsor of the show and asking for you to check out the Etsy shop, etsy.com/shop/apes-in-capes, customizable Shadowbox cubes. There's a link in the show notes. Go browse. I guarantee you will not be disappointed. Plus, if you order, you can get 10% off your order by using the code word MAGIC at checkout. These things are perfect additions to your collection and are truly great pieces of handmade work. A reminder, the next 5 patrons who join up to the Patreon for the show and cross $100 will receive a special edition Shadowbox Cube, Urza and Mishra battling it out at Friday Night Magic. You gotta see it to believe it. So again, etsy.com/shop/apes-in-capes, 10% off with the code MAGIC at checkout, and support the show on Patreon to help support my daughter meeting her grandparents for the first time. I'm grateful you are here. Enjoy. Chapter 3. Gatha stood in the Grand Vault, as it now had been formally named, the focal point for the creation of Metathran warriors. It was also the central hub to the various labs and workshops in which the bulk of the work for the Bloodlines project, and to a lesser extent the ongoing Legacy project, was accomplished. He still could not help admitting to being impressed by its sheer magnitude. The arches, the central pillars that housed most of Rain's mana-focusing lenses, the space. Urza certainly did not think small. Neither did the young tutor. Gatha paced a short path alongside one of the gestating cradles, its curved nose sticking out of the large socket into which it had been plugged until full gestation of the Metathran warrior was achieved. This one was his warrior, one of those which would owe its existence, not exactly a life, to Gatha. His hard-soled boots beat a slow rhythm against the polished stone floor. One hand trailed along the side of the cradle, over rough gear teeth and the alternating smoothness of polished metal and glass viewports that looked into a dark interior. He did not attend the birth of them all, but this one might be special. He would know soon. Timon found him there. "Master Gatha," the younger man said by way of address, voice devoid of any emotion. The senior student waited for acknowledgement before continuing. Gatha glanced over and nodded curtly. 6 subjective years had done little for Timon except to sharpen the student's mind. Still a tall and gangly body that looked ready to fall apart in a strong breeze, and an Adam's apple that almost split through the skin on his neck. At least his voice had lost the reedy tenor of youth. Timon began to bring him up to date on some of the minor experiments being conducted in real time, leafing through a stack of reports he carried in his knobby hands. As he listened, Gatha compared and admired his own features in the reflection of cradle viewports. 8 years, again subjective, had brought Gatha into a comfortable stages of manhood, nearing 30. He now wore a trimmed goatee that he reached up to stroke while listening to Timon's report. He had filled out physically, and his mind had never been so brilliant. A tutor, one of the youngest ever, though he fell shy of Teferi's mark by a solid 2 years. Master of Time, he considered himself. He felt himself second only to the Master Mage Baron and Chancellor Rain, who lived in the more extreme slow time and rarely ventured forth. 8 subjective years passing in between moderate slow time environments and real time, while for Dominaria 42 years had passed. In the moderate fast time envelopes, where much of his actual work was accomplished by students, over 70 years of research and production had accrued. Preoccupied with their own relative immortality and the fate of Dominaria as real time progressed, most other tutors and scholars underused the fast time outposts. Gatha prided himself on never wasting opportunity. Results of recessive gene enhancement post-birth? Negative. Timon's voice barked out the word, bordering on disrespect and definitely capturing Gatha's full attention. Surviving subjects show high rate of mutation, considered inadequate for further bloodline development. Wheeling, Gatha strode over to Timon and snatched the report. It still smelled of fresh ink, and his thumb smeared one of the red circles that highlighted various figures. Gatha's strong hands wrinkled the parchment, clutching it tightly. Teeth clenched hard enough for his jaw to ache, he read down the list of 3 years' relative work wasted. The red circles were no doubt Timon's notations, calling attention to numbers that supported the student's own predictions of 4 months ago. Gatha spared the student a quick glance, but Timon had settled a careful mask into place. Preparedness of the student allowed Gatha to place an easier handle on his own range. What do you make of this, Timon? Gatha had learned years ago that Timon did not volunteer information, not to him at least. Though a promising sorcerer, Timon made no secret of the fact that he disapproved of the Bloodlines project. The trouble he occasionally stirred made it easy for Gatha to sidetrack the younger man's own studies, keeping him junior through extended assignment in slow time. It helped, more often than not, having an assistant nearly as brilliant as himself. Also, Gatha was not about to let Timon remain in real time where the sorcerer could conceivably age and learn faster and be promoted over him. That wouldn't do at all. Timon merely shrugged. I made my opinion known months ago, Master Gatha. A not so subtle method of reminding the academy tutor that Timon's opinion had also been right. I imagine Master Urza and Baron will not care to hear that this tampering post-birth exceeded their guidelines. Ah, a threat. Gatha smiled at the challenge. As he had noticed years ago, Timon simply did not know when to stop while ahead. Waving over a junior artificer who worked on the nearby cradle, Gatha ignored his young charge. This cradle, he said, kicking at the device that held his latest Metathran experimentation, is to be unplugged at once and the subject delivered to my workshop. If the other experiments had failed as badly as the report suggested, a similar procedure used during this Metathran warrior's gestation would prove similar. Autopsy would provide that answer and perhaps a suggestion for new paths. The artificer turned back toward her workspace. Do it now! Gatha ordered. Though he knew standard practice for artificers, as ordered by Chancellor Rain, was to always keep an orderly space. Likely, the girl was going to set about putting tools away or some such bother. The subject is within hours, perhaps minutes of full gestation. I do not want it brought to full term. Damn the standard procedures. Timon had evidently caught the nuances of Gatha's early termination of the Metathran gestation, connecting the tutor's displeasure with the report he now held. Gatha noticed the gaze of frustration and sorrow which his apprentice directed toward the failed experiment. He almost laughed, wondering what Timon's reaction would be if privy to Gatha's more recent alterations, most of those with the tacit permission of Urza Planeswalker. To recapture his attention, Gatha held up the report Timon had furnished and slowly ripped it down its length. This report, he said with a quiet hardness, words underscored by the tearing sound, has obviously been exaggerated to the point of error. I will visit these labs myself. The report was in two pieces now. Gatha folded them together and proceeded to tear again, this time across the shorter axis. Timon, you will take the rest of the reports to my office and compile all data. He quartered, refolded, and tore the report again. Let me know what Baron's people are working on as well. The fragments of the report went into an outer pocket. Gatha frowned at the smudge of red ink staining his thumb. He reached over and rubbed it out against the dark blue border of Timon's sleeve. The student mage could only stare in dumbfounded silence. When Gatha nodded a dismissal, Timon blinked away most of his shock and then turned to do as he had been bid. In Timon's years on Tolaria, Gatha doubted the apprentice sorcerer had ever seen data purposefully destroyed. The shock value, seeing it wash over that gaunt face, had been exquisite. Doesn't matter, Gatha whispered after the departing figure. The report concentrated on the past. Only the present, the now, mattered. Behind him, the echoing clangs of a cradle being unplugged from the central machinery ran out, echoing in the cavernous theater. Now, Gatha had other projects to begin. Karn discovered himself actually stalling. The silver golem had been asked to summon Gatha into the presence of Baron and Urza and had already managed to be sidetracked by two other errands. In the time lock, passing into the slow time area where Gatha had settled his own quarters and a modest workspace, Karn had paused to study the device. Without a cushioning effect, a human body could not withstand the transition of extreme temporal changes. The instant alteration in blood flow that occurred on the cusp, one part of the body extremely slower than the other, made for radical embolisms and instant hemorrhaging. Here, in the time lock, slow time waters were pumped out of the same well that served Gatha's facilities. They were then misted into a series of chambers which stood just outside the radical change in temporal flux. The density of mist in each chamber stepped up the farther one penetrated, preparing the body for slow time. The water was then reclaimed and returned to the water table via another shaft. It was very efficient, a variation of the first device built by Joyra, who had noticed water's tendency to retain the temporal qualities in its original environment and so could be used to alter time in small areas. Joyra. She was rarely far from Karn's thoughts, his first true friend after the golem gained sentience. He had thought her dead once, only to regain her companionship and then lose it again as she moved on to a life that did not include Tolaria. He saw her occasionally, perhaps once every decade, but for Joyra, time had already mended the wounds of separation. Karn could expect no such relief. Ironic that with Tolaria's ongoing mastery over temporal mechanics, he had yet to find a way to distance himself from a pain better than 50 years old. After his emergence into the slow time environment, Karn stopped by the side of a small, fragrant flower garden to pick a chrysanthemum, its deep purple reminding him of Joyra's darker hair and its sweet scent the light perfumed oil she had worn on occasion. Finally, the golem admitted to himself that his delays were moving further from the realm of plausibility and toward the denial of his task. He abruptly handed the flower to a passing female student and set off for Gatha's tower without an answer to her look of surprise. Stopping to smell the flowers simply was not a cure for his pain or a fair delay in his mission. Still, memories of Joyra were not easily set aside. Drawn to make human contact, the golem could not help establishing relationships with those around him, even though he recognized each one as another potential loss or pain to deal with. Gatha had set up a stasis field in his small workshop where failed Metathran warriors could be brought and kept in isolation while he ran his own tests. 4 subjects currently crowded that field, 2 of them so deformed as to look more animal than humanoid. A third was hunched over, misshapen but recognizable. The 4th looked perfect in every regard, right down to the blue skin and Thran script that appeared as tattoos but were actually natural marks, never 2 identical. These creations would remain in stasis indefinitely. The alternative was to destroy a failed subject since the regular stasis fields were used to store viable warriors for use during the time of a Phyrexian invasion. Karn couldn't say for sure that destruction wouldn't be preferable, and therein lay in the problem. Gatha didn't care. The tutor was brilliant but reckless. Karn had compared him to Teferi at first, but Teferi had been a spoiled boy who grew out of his troubles and into a responsible wizard. This Karn did not say to Gatha, but hoped it would be implied. "Don't look so glum, Karn," Gath said as he noticed the golem's arrival. "You're too bright to be gloomy." Gatha chuckled at his own joke, then glanced back to the warriors. "I've been expecting you. Baron's unhappy again, I take it?"
"He wants to see you right away."
Gatha returned to his observation of the Metathran, shaking his head either at Baron's summons or something to do with the 4th warrior subject. There it was again, a lack of any real concern for anything but what he focused on at the moment, and here every moment caused severe delays in real time where Baron and Urza waited. "Look at him," Gatha said. "Perfectly formed, beautiful." He ran one hand back over his head to smooth back his own hair. Karn had noticed in the recent years that Gatha preferred to display his own tattoos, as if this somehow related him to the Metathran warriors and their own markings. "And completely psychotic. He can attack when angry or pleased, or might simply curl up and become catatonic for days."
"And those others?"
the golem asked, nodding toward the malformed warriors. He watched the young tutor's face for any signs of misgivings, but found none. "Older subjects." Gatha dismissed them with a wave of his hand, then reached up to stroke his goatee. "No, this one is the closest I've come yet to my goal. My fast time laboratories will be concentrating on data from its gestation for several subjective years."
"No," Karn said. "They won't."
He hated to be the one to bring such news to Gatha, but Master Baron had been direct. If Gatha did not respond immediately to a summons, Karn should deliver the news himself.
"Your fast time labs are being diverted to other projects. Bloodlines work, but under another tutor, and this time overseen by an Academy scholar."
This grabbed the tutor's attention, and nothing else could. "Baron's orders?" Gatha did not bother to hide his anger, but even when Karn confirmed it with a slow nod, "We'll see about that," he grabbed up his cloak and strode immediately for the door, leaving the golem to follow or not as he pleased. Karn trailed behind, feeling miserable. He received only slight justification in the obvious foresight of Baron's orders. Apparently the only way to motivate Gatha was to deliver such blows. Baron and Urza had commandeered a classroom which could seat 100 students comfortably. It was the closest empty room at hand when Urza had reappeared. The Planeswalker spent so little time on Tolaria these days, hounded by Phyrexian negators and not wanting to lead them back, The Weatherlight visited less often for the same reason. Occasionally, some cases at the academy still required Urza's presence, and Gatha was certainly one of them. The rogue tutor stood alone in the dead space that separated where Urza and Baron sat from the first level of seating where Karn now waited. A thin, placating smile on his face, Gatha affected an air of someone wronged at great trouble and personal expense, a child convinced in his own superiority and put upon only for his smaller size and fewer years. On the surface, the young tutor bore up under the rebuke admirably. Standing in silence, a slight flush to his skin and the hard cast to his eyes were the only signs of his inner feelings. Hands clasped behind his back, he simply nodded to every point made by Baron and bowed to Urza's final demand.
You must adhere religiously to the guidelines as set down for the Bloodlines project and exercise more discretion when it comes to the presentation of your work.
Urza waited and prompted for a reply.
Is that understood?
Yes, Master Urza, of course. He was unable to hide the spark of anger that still smoldered behind his narrowly focused eyes.
My fast-time laboratories,
Without them, Baron interrupted, voice hard, you will be forced to slow down and adhere to the guidelines we've set. Your third-generation subjects tend toward anger and brutality, even in their early years, and your rate of mutations are far above the average. Urza rubbed at his chin with his right hand.
Anger and brutality are fine, each in its place, but these are unfocused.
He shook his head.
Most third-generation subjects show an increased lack of emotional focus. That's a step backward, and you're leading us in that direction. We need to discover what is setting us back. We'll commit more generations to the fast-time pockets. Try to generate data at better rates. If we solve these problems, you may get those labs back.
He waited, and this time Gatha volunteered a curt nod.
That is all.
Gatha bowed his leave from the two of them, did not look at Karn at all on the way out, a fact the golem did not miss. The silver man made as if to leave, unsure of whether or not to follow. In the end, he waited, and Baron set Karn's obvious problems aside for now.
He will ignore us, Urza, said Baron. He'll be more circumspect, for a while, but nothing will slow Gatha down except to further strip him of resources.
Urza, as was typically the Walker's way, concentrated more on his own concerns. He shuffled a paper from out of a nearby stack, glancing over the report.
Why this step backward?
He asked again to the room in general. He glanced up.
You have more to say about Gatha?
He's incorrigible, Baron snapped. Drunk on power and his own genius, and now bitter that we've interfered with his fast-paced plans. We'll regret every day that we do not curtail him.
You once thought the same about Teferi.
Urza actually allowed a touch of humor in his voice. He continued to scan the report. Baron shook his head forcefully.
Teferi deserved a good switching, but he did not destroy lives. Urza, this man is out of control and is affecting the work of other students and tutors, raising again the same moral issues we've wanted to avoid in the past. Gatha takes too many chances.
Urza evidenced no reaction, unimpressed by the dramatics. The mage sighed, feeling his ears. He tried a new tack.
Do you know how many of his failures are stacking up in the stasis chambers? Some of our newest students, those born on Tolaria, are now trying to discover magical ways to cure deformities we've left for them as a legacy.
Gatha is responsible for several of what few breakthroughs we've had augmenting the bloodlines,
Urza argued calmly. He lifted his gaze to find Baron's.
You know what he did to help bring the Metathan labs on schedule?
Yes, Baron knew. He had assigned Gatha the work, hoping that getting his hands dirty might knock the indifferent edge off the boy. Instead, Gatha had acquired a taste for it. He dressed in dark clothing these days, not the precise Argivian uniform he had when he arrived at the academy. The better to hide bloodstains, Baron felt for sure.
The Metathran are our own sin, but you've convinced me of their necessity. The bloodlines, though, involve and affect real lives.
Baron swallowed, trying to coax life back to his cotton-dry mouth.
Don't remind me that they are all volunteers, because this goes beyond that.
He glanced toward Karn and then continued.
He's introducing Phyrexian material into the main eugenics matrix, he said matter-of-factly.
Now Urza paid attention.
How did you find that out?
He asked sharply. Baron stammered at the walker's reaction, his scalp prickling. The eugenics matrix was a Thran artifact that Urza recovered and modified and was the key to genetic manipulation. The matrix and the simpler devices based on it offered the only real chance for success of the Bloodlines project. They also represented the opportunity for terrible abuse. All new procedures were supposed to be cleared by Urza or Baron. The mage had heard unconfirmed rumors only, but had hoped to shock a reaction out of the Planeswalker, never thinking that, if true, Gatha could be operating with permission.
You knew? He asked in a hoarse whisper.
How else would Gatha get a hold of Thran genetic material? Urza stressed the different name, though of course they were one and the same. Noticing Baron's frown of confusion, he said, Acquired from the most recent incarnations, of course, but as descendants of the Thran, we can hope to reacquire their better traits. He brushed this semantics aside with a quick wave. Where did you hear this?
Karn,
Baron answered, nodding to the silver golem. He brought some rumors to my attention, which led back to Gatha. He noticed the golem start. Karn began to speak, and then, with a confused expression, obviously decided against it.
I'm still investigating, the mage finished.
Then he may stop investigating, Urza said simply. Noticing Baron's look of dawning horror, he continued. Nothing is more important than the legacy. We agreed to that years ago, yes? He waited for Baron's reluctant nod. It does matter that they are volunteers. I would not burden you with such troubles here in Tolaria if they were not. I must have the heir to the legacy. Urza's eyes burned away, and his illusionary mask of a young face, twin power stones shone out in their stead. Someone who can emphasize with the Phyrexians enough to outguess them, to understand how to employ the legacy to defeat them, possibly inside Phyrexia itself. Once Karn has joined with... Speaking of whom... Baron interrupted as soon as Karn's name was mentioned, talking over Urza's next few words. Karn, would you mind finding Rain? She's visiting some of the real-time labs. Let her know I'll be late, and help out if she needs anything.
Of course, Master Baron.
Karn bowed stiffly from the waist, the relief in his voice telling how happy he was to finally have an order. The golem exited through the same door Gatha had used. Urza had turned back to the report he held as soon as Baron mentioned Rain, his intensity at the moment before forgotten just as easily it had come. This was not the first time Baron had noticed that Urza seemed uncomfortable around the idea of the mage being married. It nettled him slightly and led him to wonder at the walker's odd manners.
She does worry, sometimes,
the mage said by way of explaining Karn's mission. Looking up from the report, Urza nodded. I'm sure. To the swamps of Urborg with Urza's indifference. This chance upon him, Baron said, I am married, you know. Her name is Rain. I know that. Urza's expression did not change.
Do you disapprove?
Baron asked directly. What makes you think I do? Again, no expression, but there was a hint of curiosity in his tone. Baron leaned forward onto the table they shared. You avoid her. Even the mention of her. I've noticed before that you take special pains to prevent encounters. He paused.
I'm sure she notices too, though she'll never say so.
The walker nodded. So you think I disapprove? Baron, his voice trailed off as if he were trying to organize his thoughts or was deciding what not to say. Baron, my own experience in relationships I do not claim to have a clear understanding of mortal events. I try to leave well enough alone where my concerns are not needed and my presence is possibly disruptive. It was a plausible answer, slightly evasive, but plausible.
You do approve?
Baron asked, fishing for a straight answer for once. He held Urza's gaze as if he could will the truth from the walker. Life must endure, Baron, Urza finally said. That more than anything defines our purpose on Tolaria. He paused, then. I think you have done well. I certainly would not have chosen any other mate for you. Baron should have known better, hoping for an easy answer. Urza stood, gathering up the reports he had been reading. The perfunctory way he went about collecting his papers might have signaled an end to their conversation, and Baron was willing to let it go. Ending a conversation on a positive note for once would be nice. Urza was of another mind. Why did you want Karn to leave the room? He asked, pausing halfway to the door. The walker was not always obtuse to the mortal events around him. Baron nodded. You were about to say that Karn would be joined with the Weatherlight, weren't you? And right in front of him? The Planeswalker stared back, waiting. Baron shook his head.
Urza, he isn't a cog or a gear. Karn is a sentient being capable of making decisions which affect his life.
I doubt you even noticed, but... The mage trailed off, drawing a strange parallel between Karn's obvious personal troubles and the previously discussed problems with the Bloodlines. Could one be too empathic, or have too perfect of a memory? Urza shrugged indifference to Baron, either missing or more likely not caring that the mage had interrupted himself. He hovered in the doorway.
The Weatherlight will require a governing mind when it comes time for its grand purpose, as directed by the air. Karn is perfect for that task. He will complete the Weatherlight.
With that, he walked from the room. The Planeswalker's use of the term complete ran a chill through the mage. That was how the Phyrexians described the replacement of flesh with artifice as the completion of the body. Baron slid into a nearby chair, his strength deserting him. In all the years he had known Urza, Baron could not remember hearing the Planeswalker use the term in a similar context. Ever.